if I asked you right now, who invented the fairy tale, you'd probably say the Brothers Grimm, or Hans Christian Andersen, or, if you want to get really historically nerdy with me, maybe Charles Perrault, the French guy who wrote the first version of Cinderella? Wrong. All of them. Wrong. The actual inventor of the fairy tale and the person who literally coined the phrase we still use today was not a grumpy old German man collecting stories from peasants. It was a rebellious 17th century French woman. Her name was Madame d'Aulnoy. And before she invented the most famous literary genre in human history, she was busy surviving a forced marriage, framing her abusive husband for treason, fleeing the country, and acting as a secret spy for the Kingdom of France. Yeah, Disney left that part out. Today I'm going to tell you the completely insane true story of the woman history tried to erase and how she used magical stories about dragons, fairies, and cross-dressing princesses to secretly wage war against the King of France. Buckle up to understand how badly Madame d'Aulnoy got robbed by history. We have to look at the lie we've all been sold. For the last 200 years, we've been told that fairy tales are ancient, primitive stories. We picture peasants sitting around a dirty medieval campfire, telling stories about talking wolves and magic beans. And we retold that guys like the Brothers Grimm just came along in the 1800s and wrote them down to save them. But that's a carefully crafted myth. Fairy tales is a specific, published, recognized genre of literature didn't start in a muddy village. They started in the most glamorous, wealthy, and politically dangerous place on earth. The aristocratic salons of 1690s Paris. And the undisputed queen of that world was Marie Catherine du Gemere di Ai Bonnevidu, Baroness d'Au. Let's just call her Madame d'Aulnoy. Madame d'Aulnoy was born in 1650. And like most women in 17th century France, her life was decided for her before she even knew how to read. At the age of 15, her family forced her to marry a man who was 30 years older than her. He was a baron. He also had a reputation for drinking, gambling, and allegedly assaulting people. It was a nightmare. Now, most women in this era just had to suffer in silence. But Marie, she chose violence in 1669, when she was just 19 years old. Marie Catherine and her mother hatched a plot to get rid of this awful husband. They didn't poison him. That would be too obvious. Instead, they found two men to publicly accuse the Baron of lèse-majesté, which is a fancy French word for treason against King Louis XIV. In 17th century France, treason meant an automatic death sentence. They literally tried to have him executed by the state. It was brilliant, except it failed. The Baron proved his innocence. The two men who accused him were executed instead, and a warrant was immediately put out for the arrest of Marie Catherine and her mother. Her mother fled to England, but Marie Catherine, she supposedly hid under a bed in a church while the king's police searched for her, before escaping through a window and fleeing the city. For the next 15 years. She was a fugitive. Historians lose track of her here. She pops up in England, Spain, and Holland. There are incredibly strong rumors that the only reason she was eventually allowed back into France was because she agreed to act as a secret spy for the French government, sending back intelligence from rival nations. This is the woman we are dealing with. She is a survivor. She is a rebel. And she is incredibly smart. And when she finally returns to Paris in 1685, she is about to change literature forever. When Madame d'Aulnoy returned to Paris, she started hosting a salon. If you don't know what a French salon was, imagine a private, invite-only VIP club run exclusively by women. Because women weren't allowed to go to universities or hold political office, they created their own intellectual universe in their living rooms. They would gather, drink early versions of hot chocolate, debate philosophy, and most importantly, play a parlor game. The game was to take a boring old folklore plot and improvise a wildly entertaining, highly complex story on the spot. But these weren't stories for children. These were stories by adult women, for adult women. And because King Louis XIV had strict censors who would throw you in prison if you criticized the government or the patriarchy, these women used magic as a shield. They couldn't write an essay saying, "Forced arranged marriages are a human rights violation." But they could write a story about an evil ogre who locks a princess in a tower, and the clever fairy who helps the princess escape and establish her own independent kingdom. Do you see what's happening here? Magic wasn't just for fun. Magic was a coded language for female liberation. In 1697, Madame d'Aulnoy published a massive collection of these stories, and to describe them, she invented a brand new phrase. She called her book Les Contes. Fées, translated to English, Tales of the Fairies, the fairy tale. She literally named the genre, and her stories became an absolute massive viral sensation across Europe. She was far more popular than Charles Perrault or any male writer of her time. But here's the absolute tragedy of it all. If you read Madame d'Aulnoy's original stories today, you will realize how badly we have been robbed by modern because her princesses didn't just sit around sweeping floors waiting for a prince to kiss them. Her heroines were active, messy, powerful, and bizarre. Take her masterpiece, a story called The White Cat. In this story, a human prince travels to a magical castle ruled entirely by a society of highly intelligent cats. The queen of this kingdom is a white cat, and she is a total boss. She rides into battle on a monkey, she commands armies, and she and the prince hang out and fall in love. At the end of the story, the white cat tells the prince, "To break my curse, you must chop off my head and tail and throw them into the fire." The prince refuses. He's horrified, but the queen demands it. So, he does it. Instantly, she transforms back into a powerful human queen. But here is the genius part. Unlike Disney movies, where the woman gives up her power to marry the king, in this story, the queen keeps all her power. She grants him a piece of her kingdom. She is the savior of her own story. In another one of her stories, Belle, the female heroine cross-dresses as a male knight, fights in a war, rescues a king, and rejects traditional romance altogether. These stories were spicy, they were feminist, they were subversive, and they were brilliant. So, why haven't you ever heard of her? Madame d'Aulnoy was the queen of the Parisian literary world. But after she died in 1705, the world started to change. By the time the 1800s rolled around, society became obsessed with strict conservative family values. The idea of adult women telling subversive, anti-marriage stories about magical cross-dressing knights became dangerous. Publishers realized there was a lot of money to be made if they just took these stories, stripped out all the rebellion, stripped out all the female agency, and sold them as simple, moral bedtime stories for children. Enter the Brothers Grimm. When the Grimms published their famous collection in 1812, they famously claimed they were preserving the pure German peasant oral tradition. But modern historians have proven that many of the stories the Grimms published were actually just watered down, heavily edited versions of the stories invented by Madame d'Aulnoy and the French salon women. A century earlier, the men took the credit. They changed the active, powerful queens into passive, sleeping princesses. They turned stories of female solidarity into stories of women competing for male attention. And the wild runaway spy who started it all was pushed into the footnotes of history. I make videos on this channel because I believe old stories matter. They shape how we see the world. For decades, we've looked at fairy tales and thought, wow, women back then really just wanted to be saved by a prince. But that is a lie written by the men who came later. When you actually read the women who invented this genre, you realize they were writing stories of escape, of power, and of ultimate freedom. Madame d'Aulnoy didn't have a fairy godmother to save her from her abusive husband. She had to do it herself, and then she gave that same power to her character. It is time we put some respect on her name. If this video changed the way you look at fairy tales, hit the like button so the algorithm pushes this hidden history to more people. And I want to hear from you in the comments. Now that you know the truth, which fairy tale trope do you think is actually a secret coded message? Drop your theories down below. If you want to know the actual dark history behind Cinderella, click this video right here. It is way weirder than you think. I'll see you in the next one. Keep reading the originals.